Hello, and welcome to Norway Between the Wars, 1918 to 1914. Once again, a period, as we've seen after the Napoleonic War, of great destruction, slow rebuilding, then a period of prosperity, as there was in the 19th century for Norway. This is going to happen again now at the end of World War I. The Norway claws its way back to prosperity, but that period of prosperity is going to be very short, unlike the 100 years of prosperity that follows the Napoleonic War. So let's look at the end of World War I. At the end of World War I, the Germans are defeated. The German Kaiser is in exile in Holland, and the Allies are victorious. But that victory came at huge price. All the countries involved in World War I had borrowed heavily to support the war effort. And at the end of the war, they were all bankrupt. Germany, France, and Great Britain. And world trade has completely collapsed. Now, in addition to the fact there was no international trade or very little international trade, Norway's merchant fleet has been destroyed. 50% of it's destroyed during the unlimited submarine warfare in 1917. So it leads to a huge amount of Norwegian unemployment in the 1918 till about 1921. There's 3 years here. Now, unemployed workers are unhappy workers, and unhappy workers look for solutions. And Norwegian workers looked to the left and they looked to the right. And on the left, they were looking to Russia. The Communist Revolution in 1917 in Russia leads to a lot of interest here in Norway. So workers are looking to the left, and they're organizing Communist Party workers' parties here in Norway. On the right-hand side, they looked to the fascist and National Socialist movements that were happening at the same time on continental Europe. So we see, but here in Norway, they're more nationalistic than they are national socialistic. They're more nationalist and capitalistic, but that's where they're looking on the right-hand side. This party here was called the Fædrelandslaget, and they were a right-leaning party. So we start to see this division in Norwegian society and economy already at the end of World War I, and that's going to continue even to today. We see a big split in Norwegian political and economic theory. Begins here at the end of World War I. Now, trade is slowly going to rebuild after the war. And once again, Norwegian products are very popular. All the timber, all the mining, the fish, all of the canned goods that were produced here, all become very popular items on the European markets, in the world markets. And so trade begins to improve. And it improves throughout the 1920s until 1929, when the world's economy collapses. In October of 1929, the American Stock Exchange, which has been hugely overpriced, totally collapses. And when it goes down, it takes everybody with it. This is going to lead to really hard times here in Norway also. By 1933, 18% of all Norwegians are unemployed. Not only industrial workers are unemployed, agricultural people are finding it really hard. They had borrowed heavily in the 20s to industrialize, and by the middle of the 1930s, most Norwegian farms had 75% of their value tied up in mortgages, in loans. In some parts of Norway, for example in Uppland, the average debt was 126% of the value of the farm. So the early 30s are really tough. Now, once again, the European powers are going to start to rearm. And every time there is a period of rearmament, as there was in the beginning and the lead up to the Napoleonic Wars, we know that Norwegian shipbuilding and the Norwegian economy really started to take off. We see it again now, that Germany really begins to rearm, and it needs raw materials, and those raw materials came from here. All of the industries that were here in Norway once again begin to produce materials that are going to be used for this rearmament program. And the Norwegian economy is going to grow once again, and by 1939, things are looking pretty good here in Norway. The economic recovery by the end of the 1930s had been quite successful. The gross domestic product in 1939, the GDP, was 200% greater than it had been in 1920. So we see huge improvements in the Norwegian economy. And not just in the economy. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about a trend that started after the war, and that was nutrition and childhood deaths. Childhood deaths in Norway had fallen 50% of their pre-war levels, largely due to improved nutrition. In the 1920s, a program started in Oslo called the Oslo Frokosten, which was a program to provide a healthy diet to Oslo school children. Every school child in Oslo got a half liter of milk, fruit, vegetables, grains in the form of bread, and meat and cheeses. And this program was the precursor to what we know today as the matpakke, where we get a mix of vegetables and meats and cheeses and bread that is served at school during the day. Now, today it's not served by the school, it's served from home and taken to the school. So that's a development in the 1920s that's going to continue even to today. So that is a quick look at trends and developments during the interwar period from 1918 to 1940. And thank you very much.